Welcome to Starter TV. I'm Jennifer Crumpton, and today I am talking via Skype in California to Kimberly Wiefling. She's the author and editor of the Scrappy Guides, a series of project management and business books for professionals. Kimberly, thanks so much for joining us today. Kimberly, tell us about your career journey.
Well, I started off loving science, so I wanted to be a scientist. But unfortunately, since my dad was a welder and I was a girl, I wasn't going to go to school, to college, so I ended up joining the Air Force. I didn't really want to go into the military, but it was a way for me to get money for college. And when I got out, I was able to go to college for physics and chemistry. It was so exciting. And then I got a scholarship to graduate school and became a physicist. And that was exciting, but not employable. So I got a job at Hewlett Packard, and I worked at HP for 10 years in 7 different jobs, including product development, program management for large, complex mass spectrometers. Turns out it was very useful to know physics and chemistry. And I found out that I was lacking some people skills, so I had to learn more about that. And then I got really tired of the job security of Hewlett Packard, so
That happens.
oh yeah, I joined a startup company, and 3 startup companies later, failing forward every time, I was able to start my own consulting business in 2001, doing global leadership, project management, and helping teams achieve what no individual could possibly achieve, and in general, doing what seems impossible but is merely difficult.
What do you think it is about you, or what qualities do you have that have made you successful along this journey?
Besides luck, hard work, refusing to give up, discipline to do what I need to do, whether I feel like it or not, those are the main things.
What role have mentors played in your career?
Huge. I could not have achieved anything close to what I've achieved without mentors, coaches, encouraging friends. I have a few particular mentors that really made a huge contribution to my career. I met Barbara Fittipaldi in 1995, and she said, "Kimberly, you don't own your own power. Stop playing small." And so she became a lifelong mentor. Even though I haven't spoken with her much over the 20 years, she's always in my head saying, "Oh, please don't ever let me hearing you undermine yourself ever again." And she really helped me seize my power and possibilities. A couple of mentors at Hewlett Packard, wonderful women who, for no reason, spent time helping me, coaching me, helping me understand how business works, how teams work, how politics works. That was the hardest. Barbara Wakefield, Gloria Duran, they spent many hours helping me over the years. And recently, in the last 2 years, Dr. Edgar Schein, a famous social psychologist, he has been meeting with me once a month, and he has been tremendously helpful in helping me understand the real underlying roots of my work in teams and organizations, and helping organizational cultures heal, grow, and thrive.
What advice do you typically give young people who want to rise to the top today?
Well, I tell them to redefine what it means to be at the top. I personally feel that hierarchies are out of date. Imagine you have a 1,000,000-piece puzzle and 1,000 people to assemble it, and you're in the middle of a huge football stadium. What would you do? Assign a CEO? Create departments? Not at all. You'd project the image of the puzzle box on the screen, you'd outline the dimensions, and people would just automatically start putting that puzzle together, flipping the pieces over, sorting things into the right color. You know, people work in organizations now where they're crossing borders and boundaries of every kind. You know, the org chart doesn't show the customers, the suppliers, government, regulatory, alliance partners, universities, communities. I mean, so many people aren't even shown on the org chart. And, you know, I work in project teams most of the time where people don't even report to the same organization. So what exactly does it mean to be at the top? I think it means maybe the top of your game, the top of your contribution or the top of your potential to contribute to this world in a meaningful way.
What would you say has been the biggest challenge that you've faced in your career, and how did you overcome it?
I'm not sure I've overcome it, but managing my intensity, you might have noticed I'm a little high energy.
You've got great energy.
Well, I never drink caffeine. Don't touch this stuff. And my energy, it's sometimes hard even for me to manage, and it's intense, and I'm deeply emotional and passionate, and it's really too much for some people. It's for some of my colleagues, for example, in engineering, my engineering colleagues have told me, Kimberly, talking to you is like talking to a blowtorch. So, my mismatch, it's like an impedance mismatch to the world. And I mean, I would love to tone it down sometimes. And people think, well, Kimberly, you can just, like throw a switch and you can tone it down. But it's not like that. It's like riding a wild bucking bronco. And sometimes I would like to take a break, but I have to stay in my head all the time. So that's a real big challenge for me. So managing my impulses and my intensity to be more appropriate and match to the situation has been tough. So what I've done is found situations that need a passionate lunatic.
And I'm sure there's tons of them out there.
There are. I work in Japan partly for that reason, because they love my passion and energy. In America, people think, oh, maybe I'm hyperactive. But there I'm a passionate sensei with great commitment to a worthy cause. So they interpret my energy differently. Oh, and in Australia, they love me because I'm gracious and refined and intense in Australia. So you just look for, where are you a fit? The world needs a Kimberly. I'm a glass of water looking for thirsty people.
You talk a lot about breakthrough leadership. What makes a great leader?
Well, it's pretty well known, and I'm a scientist by background. So shall I just share some of the research?
Sure.
Okay, so research in over 70 different countries, millions of people, by the Leadership Challenge authors Barry Posner and Jim Kouzes, found that all over the world, the 4 characteristics of the most admired leaders, number 1 is you've got to be honest. Number 2, you have to be forward-looking. And number 3, inspiring. And finally, number 4, competent. Now, there's a whole bunch of other characteristics that people want in a leader they willingly follow. And I'm talking willingly follow. But honest, forward-looking, inspiring, and competent is, that's a pretty big list, right? Because inspiring is the hardest for most people. How can you inspire other people? And I mean, it's practical too. What does a leader need to do? Well, it's different than management. Leaders need to set direction, align people on that direction, and then motivate and inspire them to go in that direction. Not force them, not boss them. And a lot of times it's practical, removing obstacles, providing resources, giving a bit of encouragement and support, or just course correcting if they get off track. So there's a whole bunch of things that you need to do. But if people don't willingly follow you, if no one's following you, you're not a leader. So you better at least attract followers first.
What creates real and lasting employee engagement? I know it's a huge problem in our workforce. What can engage employees?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. Can I just tell you how huge it is? Because I think everyone should know 70% of people in the US are either not engaged or actively disengaged. Something like 20% of people are actively working against their own companies.
No.
And that's according to Gallup research. And around the world, it's worse. It's 90% disengaged or not engaged. And the reasons are pretty clear to anybody who's ever worked in any organization, especially because of the hierarchy. Hierarchy creates dysfunctionality. So how do you want to really engage people? You have to give them some autonomy. Daniel Pink made it really clear in his book, Drive, that people respond to having control over what they do and how they do it, and having some mastery that they're doing something they're great at. They're in a flow state, and having some purpose that's bigger than earning a paycheck. You don't want to be a wage slave. You want to make a difference, not just make a living. So I'd say autonomy, mastery, purpose are good guidelines. Just treating people with dignity and respect and making them feel that what they're doing matters. My favorite story about this is long ago when the space program was just starting and John F. Kennedy, president of the US, said, hey, let's put a man on the moon by the end of the decade and return him safely to Earth. There was a guy sweeping the floor at NASA when President Kennedy went by and asked him, what's your job? This guy said, he didn't say I'm a janitor sweeping the floor. He said, I'm helping put a man on the moon.
Oh, I love that story.
I hope it's true because I've been telling it all over the world.
How can leaders encourage more innovation within their organizations?
Well, what's the enemy of innovation is incrementalism. And why do people cling to what's currently being done rather than taking bold risks? Why don't people have big, bold dreams and pursue them with great ambition and great commitment? Fear of failure. All over the world, the reason people don't have big, crazy dreams and pursue them with passion, fear of failure, mistakes are not tolerated. So if you really want innovation, you have to embrace, not only embrace and encourage, but celebrate necessary risk-taking, necessary mistake-making, and the concept of failing forward, lurching fitfully in the direction of your goals, and not just waiting until you see whether the risk paid off or not. Risks won't always pay off, but you celebrate the risk when it was taken before you know whether it worked. You still celebrate the mistake for what it was able to produce and teach us. There's plenty of products that are mistakes. Post notes are a famous example of that. Teflon, accidentally discovered. You have to allow for serendipity. You have to allow for discovery and exploration without any clear milestone of when it will pay off. And that's very tough in today's corporate environment, as you can imagine.
You talk about true teams. What is a true team like? What does that look like and feel like? And how can organizations develop true teams?
Yeah, there's a lot of people just working in groups, calling themselves a team. And I think there's a reason why there's so many sports analogies for business. It's because at least in sports, you have a shared goal, quite literally, and you have a shared identity. And you're all putting aside your status and egos for the common good. So a real team would have a shared purpose, some reason to be together that's more important than individual status and ego, and that people could put aside their status, their ego, and their comfort for the good of the team's goal, because they want that goal more than they want that status and ego, and they're willing to work together to achieve what none of them could achieve alone. So I don't put teams together lightly. It's really hard to work with other people, especially people who are different from you. But if there's something you want to do, like you want to go to the moon, you're not going to do that by yourself. Or you want to achieve a great company like a Facebook or a Google or an Adobe or a 3M or General Electric or any of the big companies in this world, Sony, Toyota, it takes a team of people. It's just impossible for one person. So you better figure out how to create a shared goal and a shared identity and a commitment to the team that's greater than our own individual selfishness.
I love how you just admit, though, it seems like the first step is admitting that it's hard to work together.
Exactly.
Because once you get that out of the way and you say it's hard to work with people who work differently, you can sort of clear the way for the next step.
Yeah, and you have to tell people up front, especially if you have positional power, you have to tell people, here's my dysfunctional behavior. And when, not if, when I act like a jerk, please put up your hand and say, Kimberly, your pills, or something. Because everybody acts irritating or frustrating at some point. And you have to give your team permission to say, hey, what's up with that? And create some working together agreements that have some teeth in them. So whenever we do violate our working together agreements, people say, I'm sorry, and they fix it, they make it right. And if you don't do that, then you get just downward spiral into unhealthy conflict and focusing on status and ego and undermining each other for selfish best interest.
What are some keys to making those painful yet necessary changes that globalizing companies often have to make?
Oh, I've had a lot of experience working with Japanese companies. For the past 8 years, I was going to Japan every month for 1, 2, or 3 weeks a month. And I saw firsthand the painful changes required by globalization. Even if you're a Japanese company with no intention to go overseas, even if you're a domestic-only Japanese company, you still have international competition. And the same goes for America. Even if you're a domestic American company with no intention to globalize, that will not stop any other company from any other country in the world from coming and cannibalizing your market. We've seen that with software engineering going to Mexico and India. We've seen that with the Walmart phase, with so many inexpensive things available made in Asia, for example. So, you're subject, every company is subject to global competition, whether or not you're aware of it. Now, if you decide you want to globalize, the first thing you have to do is create a global information sharing system and a global HR system. And as soon as you start doing that, people have to change the way they do work. They have to give up access and control over information. It's very scary sometimes to share information globally with your counterparts in different regions. And then you've got to say, well, how are we going to brand ourselves all over the world? Are we going to be known by 50 different names all over the world, or will we have some kind of branding and logo control? And again, people don't want to give up control from this regional perspective to suddenly they have to adhere to global marketing branding guidelines. That's kind of a practical thing. And then manufacturing. Well, where are we going to manufacture? Well, we've been manufacturing in the US all these years. Now suddenly most of our clients maybe are in Asia. Well, shouldn't we build a manufacturing facility close to our customers? Now, what about the jobs? Well, they're going to go there. And so people have concerns about what's going to happen to them and their jobs and their company as it expands globally. There's a whole bunch of human elements that need to be considered. One of the studies I saw really impressed me was if you looked at where headquarters get built. If a company is building a new headquarters and it's a global company and they look all over the world, where should we build the headquarters? Generally, it's within 10 kilometers of the CEO's house. So, people are thinking about what's the impact on me as my company grows and changes. So you have to take the human beings along with you for the globalization ride.
Let's get into your Scrappy books a little more deeply. Tell us briefly about the Scrappy Guide series and why you wrote these books.
Well, I started talking about writing a book when I became a consultant, and I thought I just needed to do that in order to increase my brand recognition and my brand value. And it was really hard to start writing that book. So eventually I wrote a bunch of articles and I said, all right, this is going to come together in a book. And I started to like the idea of sharing practical wisdom that was delivered in an entertaining way. I was lucky enough to start working with projectconnections.com and have a great editor, Deanna Burkhart, and she liked my voice. It's scrappy, it's funny, it's irreverent, politically incorrect sometimes, socially unacceptable sometimes, but people enjoyed it. So I wanted to write something that would be fun and useful, and you wouldn't have to spend 30 hours reading it to get something out of it. So the Scrappy Guides are supposed to be that practical, common sense that's not common practice.
So let's focus for a minute on Scrappy Project Management, which I think is the latest in the series. What is the central theme of Scrappy Project Management?
Okay, so Scrappy Project Management, it's my favorite book. It's my first one I wrote, and it's published in Japanese by Nikkei Business Press. And Scrappy Project Management was based on all of the things that I saw being done wrong when I was leading product development teams. both Hewlett-Packard and at the startup companies where I was leading organizations and teams, trying to get things to market, hardware, software, firmware. It didn't matter what the product was. There were always the same predictable and totally avoidable pitfalls that were causing us problems. And let me give you those lists. It was, first of all, we didn't have clear goals. And we didn't really have the stakeholders clear. We didn't have the priorities clear, and we couldn't communicate effectively. Doesn't that sound ridiculous?
Sounds tough.
Tough. And then later I come to find out that research from MIT on global teams found that the 4 reasons global teams fail are: they fail to build trusting relationships, they fail to communicate effectively, and it has nothing to do with language for the most part. They don't have the individual goals and the team goals aligned, so it's a lack of clear priorities, and their goals aren't even clear. And again, good, smart people working together, spending tens of millions of dollars for projects, and they don't have clear goals. They don't know who their stakeholders are. They don't have clear priorities. They're failing because of unclear roles and responsibilities, and the risks weren't identified. And it's just ridiculous. It's just like a lessons learned sheet from any project that you've ever been on. And I even found a template that's called this lessons learned post-project review template that has this little checklist of all the things that can go wrong in a project. And you can go to the end of your project and just check it off. Yeah, we did it again. Yeah, we did it again. And it's funny. So I just couldn't stand watching it. It was like watching reruns on TV. I wanted to make sure that if we failed for new and more exciting reasons. So that was my goal. Fail for new and more exciting reasons, people.
What would you say is the one big idea that you would want someone to walk away with after reading this book?
The basics, the common sense is not common practice. The discipline to do it is what's missing. Everyone knows you should have a clear purpose, the big why. Everyone knows you should have clear stakeholders, the big who, and the big what, success criteria through the eyes of the stakeholders, and then make a clear plan and work the plan with discipline. Everyone knows that. It's like knowing how to lose weight. Eat less, exercise more. Really? 60% of Americans are overweight. Thanks, we all know that. So it's the discipline to do. Common sense is not common practice. That's what separates the great from the mediocre.
How can we avoid some of those predictable pitfalls that you talk about?
Unclear goals, unclear priorities, unclear communication, and it all comes down to leadership and team effectiveness. And if you can't focus on those things, it doesn't matter how smart you are or what great technology you're using, what operating system, what programming language, all the tools won't fix it.
What are some tips to avoid making these mistakes?
Well, you have to be courageous enough to tell people, we are not going to spend time figuring out how to do this until we know exactly why we're doing it, who we're doing it for, and what exactly is success through the eyes of those high priority stakeholders. You know, people just want to get busy. Let's just go. And it's so hard to ask them, sit in a meeting, spend some time defining the goals, the communication strategy, clarifying the priorities, understanding the stakeholders, swimming in the customer's fishbowl. They just want to start building things or writing code. And, you know, you have to take a lot of pushback from people on the team who think they're really super smart. They think they know what needs to be done, and they're not willing to sit and plan. If you give human beings a choice, according to research, they will spend absolutely zero time planning and all their time doing 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. It's like going down to the hotel lobby, getting in a taxi and yelling, go, go as fast as you can. No destination. So it doesn't make you popular when you force people to take time to plan. But you have to have the discipline to do that as well and say, guess what? Liking it is optional. Doing it is mandatory.
So in Scrappy Women in Business, I know you wrote it along with several other women. And someone counters the phrase, it's about business, not emotion, in order to have a conversation about risk. So what risks in particular should women consider taking? And how is this phrase counter to how it should really be done?
Well, so Scrappy Women in Business, written with 11 wonderful women colleagues, just amazing group of women with a lot of wisdom. Risk-taking is tough for everybody. I think women inherently have to take more risk, especially the kind of women that I generally work with. We're in a technology field. We're in fields that are primarily male-dominated. And believe me, when you're the only woman in a meeting, you really stick out like a sore thumb. And you're always so visible as a woman in the technical world. Even now, there's less than 20% of women working in computer science, for example. Although there are some fields where there's more women. But, I was in physics. It was 2% women. So I tried to act like a man, and not be emotional. Guess how well that worked? I mean, yeah, it didn't work well. I'm emotional and I'm intense. Many women have different strategies for dealing with emotionalism, but it is personal. Work is personal. And I was afraid to reveal my personal and emotional side for many years. And then I got some great advice from one woman. She said, Kimberly, you're not using your feminine power. And I said, well, of course not. I don't want to take a pay cut, because
Right.
women are still paid, 72% of what men get paid. But I started to realize that bringing some kindness, some softness, some feminine power to the table really did help. Bring in some chocolates for the team. Be caring, a little bit nurturing. I'm not exactly the nurturing type all the time, but I found that women need to be willing to make themselves vulnerable, and that's risky, and to say, yes, I have these emotions, I have these feelings, and you have to be willing to be hurt, and you have to get up and keep going. Keep going is a wonderful phrase that I think could be a good guideline for anybody who wanted to be successful.
Why is the gut a great asset for women in business? And do you have examples of that?
Yeah, gut feel, actually it was legitimized in a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink, where you know, but you don't know how you know. Sort of an aggregation of a lot of information. And I know human brains are subject to all kinds of perceptual biases and cognitive distortions. But if you ignore your gut, I think you do so at your peril. I think many times my gut feeling has kept me from making stupid mistakes. For example, you interview with somebody, and during the interview you feel like, this could be a tense relationship and they're going to be your boss. Bad idea to take that job. So I walked away from some jobs because of that. And great guideline to opportunities. For example, the reason I was going to Japan every month for 8 years was because about 10 years ago, I got an offer, come and teach a 2-hour leadership workshop. I had to drive 50 miles to get there. $200 they paid me. Then they invite me to the celebration dinner and the welcome dinner. So now I have to drive 100 miles 3 times for $200. And I said, this is a Japanese company and I want to be a global consultant. Why don't I give it 100%? I had a feeling that maybe this was an opportunity, a door opening. So I went to the celebration dinner. I went to the welcome dinner. I wrote every single person who participated a personal handwritten note. I got them all chocolates, little boxes of chocolates, probably spent more than $200 doing this whole activity. Well, the next year, I get invited again, this time for 6 hours. And after that, there's this little Japanese woman in the back of the room who's been sitting there for the last 2 years who said, would you like to come to Japan? And pretty soon, we're creating a business together called Global Leadership and Talent Development. We're creating organizational change in dozens of Japanese companies who would never have hired me individually through her big, well-known company name in Tokyo. And then I had 8 of my friends going over there, traveling there a few times a year, working as well. So we created all this possibility because I had this inclination that maybe this was a door opening to my future as a global leadership consultant.
So you've also worked on a book called Scrappy IS. Yes, information security.
Right.
And you talk about the fact that people need a lot more than just a little bit of knowledge in order to keep their data and their information secure. What should organizations be doing to protect themselves?
Well, of course, you have to keep up with technology. But when I read this book, I realized that the biggest threat to creating a secure information environment was that your own people can be giving away your secrets. Your own people can be compromising the system, either on purpose or through negligence or inattention. So when I was editing this book, I was horrified. I was afraid to go on my computer. And that was mostly because of the technology that's available to come in and scrape your screen and find out everything that you're doing. But even worse was to think about how maybe disgruntled, disengaged employees might create vulnerabilities for the organization. So I think the number one thing people need to do is think about how to engage their employees into feeling really committed to the information security and responsible for protecting the company from those kinds of experiences, and have the courage to raise their hand and say, hey, there's a problem, without being afraid that they'll be blamed for the mistake. Because there's that too. If you create a system that has a vulnerability in it, do you raise it to the CIO's attention or the chief security officer's attention, or do you try to hide it? And I think those kinds of work environments would be the most scary for me, where people would hide mistakes and vulnerabilities rather than take the action needed to plug those holes.
When the recent Sony hack happened, what did you think? What did you think was the
happen?
cause?
You know, everyone gets hacked, and people don't really advertise it. I'm actually consulting with 2 IT departments right now, 2 different companies in Silicon Valley, big companies. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to be on the cover of a newspaper or magazine or on the internet blog. But everyone gets hacked. It's just a matter of how you respond to it and how you contain it, how much information they get. But Japanese companies don't like to have any public humiliation, as you can imagine. It's really horrifying. So absolutely zero failure, zero mistake making, zero risk taking would be the guideline, which means that it's hard to have a truly global IT system. So if you're trying to work for a global company that's afraid to have a global information sharing system, good luck with that. You have to take the risk. I mean, banks are online, banks and financial institutions of every kind are finding secure ways to do business. Surely, people, we can find a way to do business online that's secure. We better figure it out.
What's the most important thing to know about building a solid business contingency plan?
Business contingency planning. Oh, that's another thing I learned a lot about editing that book for my good friend Michael Cease. And I'm very proud to have both of his books in the Scrappy series. It was interesting to me to find that it didn't matter why your data system was out or why your building was inaccessible. If it was flood or fire or earthquake or a man-made disaster, it didn't matter what the cause of the outage was. You had to deal with the loss of service or the loss of the facility. So that makes the planning a lot easier, actually, because you can imagine all the different ways things can go wrong. Who would have ever predicted years ago that a volcano would interrupt air traffic service in Europe? You don't have to worry about why things might be inaccessible. You just have to figure out what you will do when you can't get to your office, when you can't get to your data, regardless of the cause of that problem.
What's the foundation for a successful contingency plan?
Just like project management, have a clear goal, have a good plan, clear roles and responsibilities, good communication among the team, and practice.
You got to practice that thing. That's
Oh,
right.
sure. Nothing ever works perfectly. Like everything goes wrong, so you've got to practice it so that you're ready in that moment to respond. People get pretty lazy and they just think, well, everything's fine. Normalcy bias, it's called. And whenever something goes wrong, they can be frozen, not knowing what to do and not springing into action. That's partly why you find people in air traffic accidents still strapped into their seats. They don't even unbuckle their seatbelt to get out, even though they were perfectly healthy and able to. They're just shocked. So you've got to practice so you're ready to spring into action when the event is triggered and your business contingency plan needs to be implemented.
And so one of the last books in the Scrappy series is the General Management book. What are the first 3 common sense steps for general management and business owners to be able to run a successful business?
Yeah, I love this book because it's written by a friend of mine in Australia, and it's very common sense, down to earth. And you start with the basics. As we said before, when you're a leader, people have a few questions in their mind. First one is, who are you? And why should I follow you? And the second question is, where are we going? So if you're going to be a great general manager as well as a great leader, you better first figure out how to connect with people and to inspire them to want to follow you as a leader, and then convince them that you've got some kind of plan to go someplace that's worthy of their time. And of course, you need to look at the market, the customers, to understand what is it of value that you're offering to your customers in your market. So it's really a combination of people leadership and business management. I think that's an essential difference that people need to understand. Leadership is not the same as management. People don't want to be managed. You manage businesses, you manage cows, you manage budget, you manage schedule, but you lead human beings, you lead teams.
When you talk about managers inspiring this confidence or inspiring people to want to follow them, is it best to seem like you have all the answers, or is it best to inspire people by being more vulnerable and open?
Yeah, well, you really need to look at the context for that. I love Star Trek. It's been a guiding force for me my whole life, especially Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Starship Enterprise. He acted with confidence and he consulted his team. So I think there's a time when you need to say to your team, all right, what are our options? Let's have a conversation for possibilities. And then there's a time to act with confidence and commitment to say, all right, we're going in this direction. It may be right or wrong, but if it doesn't work, it's my fault. If it does work, praise goes to you guys. So I think you have to have a very servant leadership approach to serving your team and whatever your team needs, whether it be strong, clear commitment and support or open vulnerability. You need to be willing to go there.
And Kimberly, we thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your expertise.
My pleasure, Jennifer. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
This is Sarter TV. I'm Jennifer Crumpton. Thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.